In winter, many children slept right on the tracks, because every time a train passed by, the rails became warm. Sometimes children who did not have time to take their feet off the tracks in time lost them. This is how a surgical nurse who managed to escape from this country in 1997 described life in North Korea. According to a UN report, about 10 million, that is, 40% of Korean citizens, are undernourished, while as much as 60% of the population lives below the poverty line. And now, the logical question is how a country that is not able to provide its own population with heat and food is able to maintain an army of millions, finance nuclear weapons programs and generally support the regime. In this video, you will find answers to this question. I will briefly explain why North Korea has become such a closed, isolated country. You will learn about the horrific ways in which this country receives money, and also how North Korea is beneficial to China and the United States. What first comes to mind when we hear about North Korea? A gray, backward country with gloomy people whose faces do not show a hint of happiness. I'm sure you have heard the horrific realities of life in this country, where people are forbidden to wear jeans, use the internet, travel abroad, and much more. While all the civilized countries of the world trade with each other, enjoy the benefits of globalization and develop, North Korea is completely devoid of any ties with other countries, except for some exceptions, which I will discuss later. There are enough of these ties there. Many people wonder why North Korea has become so closed and backward while its neighbors like South Korea, for example, are modern and highly developed. Everything will become clear when we look at history. At the beginning of the 20th century, there was no division into North and South Korea, there was one continuous Korea, which at that time was part of the huge Japanese Empire. And then World War II broke out. As we know, Japan lost it. The former empire was occupied by Soviet and American troops. The USSR and the United States agreed to temporarily divide the Korean peninsula. America occupied the southern part, and the Soviet Union occupied the northern part. You can see where this is going. Subsequently, two states were formed, a pro-American democratic South Korea and a pro-Soviet socialist North Korea. Obviously, the totalitarian socialist regime led North Korea to complete decline. North Korea has inherited from the Soviet Union a hatred of all civilized countries of the world. It constantly drills into the minds of its population the idea that poor and rotten America is trying to invade and take over their paradise. This paranoia led to the fact that North Korea began violating the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 2003, and 3 years later they tested their first nuclear bomb. Without a doubt, the world could not just leave it at that. Sanctions were imposed against North Korea, which almost completely restricted any trade with this country. Because of the sanctions, it could no longer sell its natural resources legally, and could not buy them. Okay, now that we know how the country became so closed, we can move on to the most interesting question. How does it still stay afloat? Because it seems obvious that it is impossible for a country to exist in such isolation. It's simple. Experts have estimated that North Korea's GDP last year was approximately $19 billion. For comparison, this is more than Georgia or Moldova. A significant part of the country's economy depends on the production and sale of coal. Coal exports bring North Korea from $380 to $450 million a year, and interestingly, North Korea sells all this coal illegally. It is also a popular practice when ships carrying goods from North Korea enter ports of other countries under false flags. It accounts for 75% of Korea's total trade. China is the gateway to the world for North Korea. Look here, this is the bridge of Sino-Korean friendship. It has been connecting the two nations since 1943. Dozens of Korean trucks with contraband pass through it every day. It is through this secret trade with China that North Korea manages to circumvent sanctions and bans. But there is a much worse and crueler side to all this. It concerns people and their lives. Before the most interesting part of this video, please like and subscribe to the channel to help our channel grow. Thank you. I will not surprise you if I tell you that the people of North Korea are slaves to the system. However, you probably have no idea how much money they bring to the regime. The fact is that North Korea, secretly from the world, has sent thousands of its workers to different countries. These are men who are used as the cheapest labor force in the world. They are sent to work in more developed countries. Of course, there are no adequate working conditions. Often their working day can last 14 and 16 hours. All the money they earn is at the disposal of the party and Kim Jong-un. In order to make sure that the worker does not escape, his family is kept under surveillance. If the worker escapes, his family will be doomed to life imprisonment in a labor camp. It is believed that the number of such slaves from North Korea is close to 150,000. About 40,000 of them work in Russia. About 100,000 in China. The rest are scattered mainly in the Arab countries of the Middle East, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. Experts have found that in this way, the regime receives about $1 billion a year. And now I will tell you about the most unexpected and most horrific scheme through which North Korea receives money. At its core, it is an immoral conspiracy between China and Korea, according to which the latter actually dooms the lives of its own people in exchange for Chinese money. It consists in the fact that well-known Chinese textile companies are secretly building their factories in North Korea for the sake of extremely cheap, practically slave labor. The women who work there are typical prisoners of a labor camp. They have no salary, no breaks, no days off. They are not allowed to leave the factory. In fact, they spend their entire lives in this factory. The finished clothes they produce are sold by China to Europe and America under the guise of their own. That is, the next time you see the inscription "Made in China" on clothes, you know that there is a chance that it was produced in North Korea. This information is the result of a thorough study of this problem by a group of specialists. They analyzed the activities of the most popular Chinese textile companies and found evidence of the use of this horrific scheme in most of them. As you can see, North Korea is completely dependent on China. It could easily take over, but it does not for one simple reason. It is beneficial to China because it acts as a kind of buffer between American troops in South Korea and China itself. For the same reason, this country is beneficial to America. Its existence significantly reduces the risk of a war between the United States and China. In addition to all this, North Korea is also engaged in arms sales to African countries. Their so-called partnership is based on a common love of communism. It is believed that the arms trade brings North Korea about $250 million a year. As we can see, all these sanctions and bans have practically no effect on North Korea. It has found ways to circumvent them and stay afloat even in conditions of complete isolation. Instead of conclusions, I will say that this country is the personification of the disgusting totalitarian system and socialist ideology that the Soviet Union was once obsessed with. And now it is being restored and spread to Ukraine by another demented dictator. These regimes lack the elementary concept of the value of life and respect for human dignity. Let us remember that Putin's Russia and North Korea share the same ideology, and it is our task to make sure that it never spreads beyond their borders. Thank you for your attention and see you soon.